You're sending them where? Madagascar? Are they even involved in this war? What? No, and you want to keep it that way. I see. Okay. Yeah, bye. May 2nd, 1942. Burma is the gateway to India, and it is the supply route to China, so it is a pivotal strategic point. It is also home to many natural resources, including oil and gas, that can be of great use during the war, and this week, Burma falls to the Japanese. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Japanese sent out most of their warships searching for the Allied task force that had helped bomb Tokyo. They did not find them, but they did generate tons of radio traffic that has further helped the Allies crack their naval code. Germany launched a series of air raids against tourist towns in Britain, and German and Italian bombers also managed to destroy an entire shipment of Spitfire planes that were to help beleaguered Malta. An offensive ended in the Soviet Union, and the battle for Burma basically ended when the Allied forces realized they had to evacuate the country to survive. And this week, Burma really falls under Japanese control. On the 29th, Shojiro Iida's 15th Japanese Army captures Lashio, the terminus of the Burma Road, which had been the only overland supply route to Chiang Kai-Shek's Chinese Nationalist Army. On May 1st, they take Mandalay, securing the terminus. Well, at 11:50 p.m. on the 30th, Burma Corps Commander Bill Slim gives the order to blow the Ava Bridge across the Irrawaddy River south of Mandalay after the British rearguard and the last of the refugee stragglers cross. The battle for Burma is over, but the long retreat is far from over. The route is up the Chindwin Valley, and Slim's men have to deal not only with trucks breaking down and running out of gas, not only with enormous columns of refugees, but also with constant air attacks, and they must constantly fight rearguard actions against the Japanese vanguard. They have a long way to go. But though they've lost Burma, the Allies are really trying to figure out where they can fight the Japanese. Now, the U.S. Office of Naval Communication is seriously improving at reading the Japanese naval codes, as I discussed last week. And after Admirals King and Nimitz have met in San Francisco, a meeting that began at the end of last week, they're aware of the scope of the coming Japanese attacks on Port Moresby and beyond. They absolutely want to maintain the secrecy of their intelligence gains, though, since they depend on that to gain any kind of initiative in the Pacific. King sees the Solomon Islands as the starting point for an offensive, so denying them and the Coral Sea to the Japanese is a must for him, to the point of wanting to commit the entire Pacific Fleet. But with Ranger and Wasp currently in the Atlantic and Mediterranean, a big defeat would mean they'd have basically nothing in the Pacific for the rest of the year until the Essex-class carriers are commissioned. So there's a real element of risk here. They decide to trust their intel. In a surprise move on April 30th, the Japanese fleet undertook to change their locator system. Their attempts to conceal the new system failed completely, however, when Hawaii intercepted a Fourth Fleet message containing both old and new designators. So HIPO, the intelligence center on Hawaii, publishes its evaluation of the situation. To wit, the Port Moresby operation, MO, is now underway. It includes southeastern New Guinea, but Australia itself is not an objective either now or in the follow-up operations detected. They also list the forces Japan will use. Melbourne Intel Center disagrees with a few details, but they too are clear. The operation is now underway. They've deciphered messages that the operation begins when the two carriers diverted from Kido Butai heading home from the Indian Ocean reach base at Truk. This they do on April 28th. They leave Truk again on the 1st. Edwin Layton, the head of Pacific Fleet Intelligence, says landings in the New Guinea and Solomon Islands area will begin the 3rd, tomorrow. He says there'll be 20,000 or so men strong, with the carrier Division 5 carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, a bunch of cruisers, and a light carrier, which he believes to be the Ryukaku. He is wrong. It's Shoho. The enemy objective appeared to be to extend control from their New Guinea bases and Lai and Salamaua to Port Moresby at the top of the Papuan Peninsula. The advance was to be followed by a move into the Solomons to command the Coral Sea approach to Australia and to provide an airbase from which to launch an advance south to Noumea in New Caledonia and on to Fiji to threaten to sever the sea route to the United States. The Japanese believed that one American carrier might be in the area, but that is not the case. A force has been assembled from 3 Allied task forces: TF-17 under Rear Admiral Fletcher with the carrier Yorktown, TF-11 Rear Admiral Fitch with the carrier Lexington, and TF-44 Rear Admiral Crease with American-Australian cruisers. Vice Admiral Halsey's Task Force 16 with carriers Enterprise and Hornet leaves Pearl Harbor on the 30th, but it's doubtful they can reach the region in time to be of service. Nimitz and King see these islands as a marine highway that they'll need for attacks on Rabaul, Japan's main airbase down there, and against Japan's southern perimeter. So they're sending in all they have. 7 battleships have joined the U.S. Pacific Fleet since Pearl Harbor, but there are not enough advanced bases or fast oilers to use them here. So they've been sent to mainland U.S., and the carrier task forces are going to try to stop the Japanese here. Today, the Australian garrison at Tulagi, an island near Guadalcanal, is evacuated. The Japanese want to take Port Moresby, and their force is divided into 5 groups for this and smaller tasks. Admiral Takeo Takagi has the 2 fleet carriers, who are giving air cover for the whole operation. Admiral Aritomo Goto has 4 heavy cruisers and the light carrier Shoho, which is on its first combat mission after being commissioned some 6 months ago. She was originally built as a submarine tender but was converted last year. Goto's group is first to provide close support for landings at Tulagi to establish an airbase and then to help with overall operations. The main invasion force is coming from Rabaul, and Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue is in overall charge. The whole Japanese action is on a very strict timetable, with all actions to be completed by the 10th, so the 2 fleet carriers can rejoin the combined fleet for Isoroku Yamamoto's early June Midway offensive. So there is no time for them to hit the airfields of northern Australia to get air superiority over the Coral Sea. Admiral Inouye's final prediction as his 7 units sailed to execute this complex series of operations on both sides of the Coral Sea was, "It is not likely that powerful enemy forces are in the area." Yet his whole strategy was vitally dependent on surprise. His enemy is aware, though, of his plans. The world has never before seen a battle between aircraft carriers. It may do so very soon. In other general marine news, in April, the Allies lose 132 ships for 674,500 tons. A lot of those successes come off the American coast, especially tankers. Only 7 ships are sunk in the Pacific in April, and 150,000 tons of that total was sunk in the Indian Ocean and happened largely during Kido Butai's raid a few weeks ago. On Malta in April, the RAF loses 126 planes on the ground and 20 in the air. British submarines are forced to abandon their base in the harbor, which is nearly closed anyhow because of both damage and a lack of minesweepers. As a result of this, German North African commander Erwin Rommel loses just 1% of supplies shipped to him, receiving 150 tons. The situation is desperate for the Allies on Malta. But let's get back to intelligence for a minute, okay? At the beginning of last month, Reinhard Gehlen took over as German Chief of Intelligence for the Eastern Front. He has in a short time done wonders. He uses Soviet POWs, finding those willing to cooperate with him, and sends them back behind Soviet lines as spies for him. He combs Soviet broadcasts and newspapers for bits and fragments. His crew talks to military attachés, and he is convinced that there is to be a Soviet attack on the German positions in the south. He does not believe that the Red Army is in a position to go back over to a general offensive, but will use partial offensives against where they think the German lines are weak. On May the 1st, he submits a report that such attacks are likely against Army Group Center, against the northern wing of Army Group South, and from the Izium Bulge, where he judges from the movements of the Soviet armies a Red Army Kharkov offensive in the near future is likely. He is very much correct. In fact, Semyon Timoshenko has a force of 640,000 men, over 900 planes, and 13,000 big guns getting ready to go. The plan is for the Soviet Sixth Army to hit Kharkov from the south. The forces in the Izium Bulge would attack toward Krasnograd, which would protect the Sixth Army from that direction, and a northern pincer would come from Volchansk region. Rodion Malinovsky's southern front would secure the southern flank of the Izium Bulge. The kickoff date for this is May the 12th. And here are a few notes to end the week. On the 27th is a Canadian plebiscite on conscription. It passes. French Canadians are the main, though not the only, objectors. That same day, the Amerika-Bomber final 33-page draft is completed for the German Ministry of Aviation. This is on the concept of a long-range strategic bomber that can attack the U.S., specifically New York, from mainland Europe. In order to make the round trip, a plane would have to fly well over 11,000 kilometers without refueling. And of existing German planes, only the Messerschmitt Me-261 can possibly do that, and it has not entered production. Though the report does bring up the possibility of using the Azores as a transit airfield. On the 28th, a British naval force leaves Durban for Madagascar. Some slower ships have already left. See, since Kido Butai forced the British Eastern Fleet from Ceylon and the Bay of Bengal a few weeks ago, they're now concerned with the possibility of the Japanese using Madagascar as a base of operations. It is controlled by the Vichy French. The British wish to change that situation. On the 29th, Adolf Hitler meets with Benito Mussolini and Count Chano at Salzburg. He wants them to commit more troops to the Eastern Front. They agree to send 7 more divisions, as well as the 2 already promised. They will then be formed into the 8th Italian Army. And the week comes to an end. Burma has fallen to the Japanese, and they've set their sights on Port Moresby. But the Allies plan to fight them for it, knowing their general plans from intelligence. You want to hear an absolutely brilliant quote from John Keegan that sums up Japan's situation at the beginning of May 1942? Sure you do. Okay. Their strategic horizon now ran around the whole Western Pacific and deep into China and Southeast Asia too. The historic European empires of the East, Burma, Malaya, the East Indies, the Philippines, and effectively French Indochina too, had been drawn into their sphere. To the Chinese dependencies to which they had established rights of occupation between 1895 and 1931, Formosa, Korea, and Manchuria, they had added since 1937 vast swaths of conquered land in China proper. All of the oceanic archipelagos north of the equator were theirs, and they had made inroads into those in the south. Between the west coast of the United States and the British dominions of Australia and New Zealand lay largely empty ocean, dotted by a few islands too remote or too tiny to provide their enemies with a base for a strategic riposte. From the perimeter of the southern area, the Japanese fleet and naval air forces were poised to strike deep into the Indian Ocean, towards the British Andaman and Nicobar Islands, towards Ceylon, perhaps even as far away as the coast of East Africa. Above all, their great amphibious, better, trifibious fleet remained intact. Not one of their 11 battleships, 10 carriers, or 18 heavy and 20 light cruisers had been even seriously damaged in the war thus far, while the United States Pacific and Asiatic fleets had lost, or lost the use of, all its battleships and large numbers of its cruisers and destroyers. The British and Dutch Far Eastern fleets had been destroyed, and the Royal Australian Navy had been driven back to port. All that remained to the Allies to set in the strategic balance against Japan's astonishing triumph and overpowering strategic position was the surviving naval base of Hawaii, with its remote dependency on Midway Island, and the U.S. Pacific Fleet's handful of carriers. Little wonder that hubris gripped even such doubters as Yamamoto. At the beginning of May 1942, the consumption of victory, a prospect he had long warned hovered at the very margin of possibility, seemed to be only one battle away. The developments in aviation seem to just continue and continue, but they've been ever moving forwards for decades now. During the interwar years, there were leaps and bounds in civil aviation, and if you want to learn more about that, you can check out our Between Two Wars Season 1 episode about that right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Sanchi Takamura. We would not be able to do this and make all sorts of our own developments without the Time Ghost Army. So join the army at patreon.com and timeghost.tv so we can keep getting better and better. Do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.